Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the 2022 edition of Connections Online. I am Chris Weuve. I'm the conference director. I'd like to welcome you all. Connections Online this is the second annual Connections Online. Connections Online is an outgrowth of the Connections conference movement that originally was started by Matt Caffrey in the early 1990s. It stayed for about its first 20 years as an in-person conference, and then starting within the last decade, other people decided that they wanted to do conferences also. And so now the Connections the Connections conference movement has conferences in England, in Australia, in France. There's been one in the Netherlands, there's been one in South America, and there's one in Canada. And so last year during COVID, we decided that it made sense to actually do a conference online. And we also decided, as part of doing a conference online, that it made sense to continue doing a conference online regardless of the status of Connections US. And so welcome to our conference. I'd like to especially thank my partners in crime here, Merle Robinson and Brant Guillory, who I'm going to bring on right now real quick. So there's Merle and there's Brant. So we are the people that put together the conference. If there's something about this conference you like, you should probably thank either Brant or Merle. If you've got a problem with it, I'm the guy to talk to. And I could not have done it with Brant and Merle, especially Brant, who's the person who handles all the registration stuff. And so I'd like to really thank him. He's also has support from some of his fellow Armchair Dragoons. And in just a few moments, he's going to talk to you about that organization. They're as close to an official sponsor as we have. And so thank you very much for you guys doing this. So yes, official. So, all right, I'm going to take them off. We also have in support Zach Grant and Lissa Beck. Lissa's going to be doing a lot of the StreamYard production. If you watch me on my other show that I do on Saturday nights, you know that Lissa is the producer there. And so she's an experienced StreamYard person. And I'd like to thank all the moderators and the panelists who have volunteered their time to come and make this happen. You know, a lot of these people have put in a lot of work to make this happen. And so thank you to them. And thank you for attending, whether you're attending in person, live, while we're doing it now. I not really in person, right? You know, live while we're doing it now, or you're watching this later. Thank you for your time. We all appreciate the fact that you came and did that. So let's see. Connections Online, like all the other Connections conferences, can be described as being a professional conference. Now, what do I mean by professional? A lot of the people that are here don't get paid for being wargamers, for being designers, for any of the stuff that they do with wargaming. So it's not really professional in that standpoint. Some people prefer the term practitioner, and that's actually a pretty good term, because what practitioner in this context means is that they're people who take games seriously, and they apply analysis, they apply expertise, and they you know, they're not just doing it for fun. That doesn't mean that they can't have fun, but it means they're taking an intellectual approach where they're trying to analyze why things work, why things don't work, et cetera, and they're trying to make wargaming, well, all gaming, better as a result of their efforts. And so that's really the target market that we're aimed at. I'm not saying that if you're a Warhammer 40K person, you're not welcome, because I'm a Warhammer 40K person. And so I would never say that to a fellow member of that club. But what I'm saying is that if all you want to do is just go and play a game at the local game store, you might very well decide that this isn't your conference. And that's perfectly okay. There's plenty of other things on YouTube that you can watch that it will scratch that itch. But if you're interested in how games are made, how one might get paid for being a professional war gamer, how games work in DoD, how DoD uses games, if you're interested in topics like that, and you want to find out places where you can learn more about gaming at that level, then hopefully we can scratch that itch for you. So finally, a few things to remember before I turn it over to Brant. One is, unless any of the speakers say otherwise, they are speaking for themselves. I think almost everybody here is here on their own time. I took leave. I'm not here on my day job time. I took leave in order to do this. So assume that people are speaking for themselves unless they explicitly say otherwise. Secondly, we're trying to run a professional conference here. So keep that in mind when you're talking in Discord, when you're chatting in Discord, when you're chatting in YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. Please keep those things in mind. We ask that everybody in Discord use their real name rather than whatever their normal Discord handle is, because part of this is a networking opportunity. It's an opportunity for people to learn from other people. It's an opportunity for people to make contacts that they can put in their Rolodex. For those of you that are old enough to remember what a Rolodex is, it's intended to serve those functions, right? We're very aware of the fact that if we were an in-person conference, a big chunk of the conference takes place in the hallway, not in the seminar rooms. And so we're trying to replicate that hallway function by having Discord as a place to function as a virtual hallway for people to get together and exchange information and stuff. Using your real name makes that a lot easier. We experiment a little bit with Connections Online. Last year was a big experiment. We hadn't done anything last year. This year, we're doing things a little bit differently. Last year, we had people go into Discord to put in questions. This year, we're doing it here in YouTube chat. We turn chat on. Please put any questions you might have in YouTube chat. The moderators will do their best to copy those questions out of the YouTube chat and paste them in to the private chat. So for those of you that haven't picked up on this yet, this is me giving stealth instructions to some of the moderators that I hadn't had a chance yet to tell them about this. Put it into the private chat so that the moderators on the panel can see those questions, and then they can throw them up on the screen once the moderator starts talking about that question. So we hope we get lots of questions from you folks. And the other thing we're going to try to do, if somebody starts talking about a particular thing online, we'll try to very quickly go find a link or a URL to it and throw that up on the screen too. So we're here to try to give you as much information about professional wargaming as we can. Next, I'd like to let everybody know that next year's Connections Online is going to be the week of April 17th. 17th is a Monday. Don't know if we're going to start on Monday. We might start on Tuesday like we did this time, but it'll be 2 or 3 days long, probably. We haven't had the postmortem of this one yet. But it's going to be the week of April 17th. And that's far enough away from Easter. This year, we ran into a few issues because it made it harder to train people up beforehand because Easter got in the way. We've learned our lesson. Every time we do this, we're probably going to do things a little bit different. And when we do that, part of it is to do an experiment so we can figure out how to make it even better the next year. The last thing I'd like to say to everybody before I turn it over to Brant is please enjoy yourself, right? This is intended to be fun. I'm enjoying myself. And if there are any of the other moderators or speakers out there listening, don't stress over any of this. I'm not stressing over it. My name's the guy. People remember this as my conference, and I'm not stressing over any of it. And so, I expect there to be little foibles here and there, and, things might not work right, et cetera, et cetera. If you run into problems, please try to let us know in Discord, and we'll try to fix it as quickly as we can. So with that in mind, thank you, everybody, for coming to Connections Online, the 2022 edition. I look forward to all of us having a wonderful conference experience together. And I look forward to seeing you next year. And I look forward to Brant talking to us about the Armchair Dragoons.
You're actually looking forward to this, huh? All right. So welcome, everybody. There's not much I can say along the lines of welcoming folks that Chris hadn't already covered, other than to reiterate, one of the cool things about Connections Online is that this is occasionally a bit of a science project. This is an opportunity for us to try some new things, in large part because the barriers for attendance for this are fairly low. If we try something new and it completely tanks, and you spent money on plane tickets and hotel rooms, especially under current travel conditions, you'd probably be pretty irked with us for getting a little off the reservation. Nobody's got that issue when they're kind of at home watching in their pajamas. And so we're not afraid to try some new stuff. As Chris is fond of saying, there are times when we learn that the experiment was a success because we learned not to do that again. We're going to try and not have too many of those, but it might occasionally happen. So this year, last year's welcome took a little bit of time where Chris was rolling out the concept of connections online. I think everybody's fairly comfortable with the idea of these sort of online conferences these days. And so his welcome message was considerably shorter this time. And my original intent was to look at some sort of Armchair Dragoons infomercial, if you will, as an after hours event. And Chris said, put it in the welcome, put it in the keynote. Let's introduce folks to the Armchair Dragoons fairly early in the conference. And so that's what I'm doing here. And because I can't help myself, we do have some slides just because, again, I can't help myself. So actually I probably could have, but where Chris gave the admonition of folks that are here are not really speaking for their organizations, I am explicitly speaking for my organization here as the Armchair Dragoons. This is sort of us as co-sponsors of this entire endeavor, and we'll explain a little bit about how we got here from there in this short set of slides. The questions are welcome as we go. I will try to tackle them as you throw them up there. And happy to help answer questions, comments, thoughts, whatever pops up along the way. So with that in mind, how we got here, what is it that we do, and sort of what's next for the Armchair Dragoons. And so who am I and why should you care? So I'm the owner and editorial director at the Armchair Dragoons. I'm the joke we use quite frequently is I'm the lead sled dog there. I spent 14 years in the Army and Army National Guard, Armored Intel. It was all at brigade and below, did not work at the high strategic level, did some of that as a defense contractor after the fact. I've spent a bunch of years in the wargame series game design world, and a bunch of the folks in the audience are looking at that and going, God, that guy's still a rookie. And you're right, I kind of am, and that's okay. I've also got over 25 years as a game writer, reviewer, podcaster, event coordinator for stuff like this. All kinds of these things. Most importantly, although James Sterrett is not here in the audience, I am always right about the distinction between games and simulations. That don't ever forget that. If James ever asks, just say, "Hey, Brant was right," and that will square things away on the differences between games and simulations. So how we got here, how we ended up with the Armchair Dragoons, and sort of what makes us different. One of the things that is different with the Armchair Dragoons versus a variety of the other strategy gaming communities out there is we've got multiple ways that you can engage with our community. We've got forums on our website. We are pretty active on a variety of social media. We've got a bunch of different live events like you're at right now. We do a variety of live streaming. We have our regular podcast. We try to cast a very wide net in terms of an expansive view of the games covered. And I already know there's some people laughing in the chat because we've had multiple arguments about sort of what is a war game over the years, as well as some curmudgeons that get very defensive about what those war games are. The reality is we talk about a lot of different kinds of games in the wargaming space, not just purely sort of hex encounter or professional kinds of war games. We have a variety of multiplayer events amongst our members that are pretty popular, whether it's playing 4X games in a multiplayer environment online. We currently have an ongoing Blood Bowl tournament. We've jumped in a variety of cases to help play test games for folks, both professionally published and commercially published. So we've done a variety of these things. We, more than perhaps any other commercial site out there, we try very hard to cover the overlap between hobby and professional wargaming. We've had multiple frequent guests on our shows from the professional wargaming realm, Chris and Merle both among them. But this is an area that we've always been very keen to make sure that we cover. And one of the other big things, we're all about enabling gameplay, whether it's trying to help find real world opponents or online opponents or inviting folks into the online games that we do. We are very heavy on enabling gameplay, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So that overlap between hobby and professional wargaming is one of the key things of importance to this audience. We do have podcast episodes with practitioners. We've got probably about a dozen of them total, whether it's interviewing Dr. Sterrett about the wargame design curriculum at the Command and General Staff College out at Fort Leavenworth, or having Chris, among others, on here about the differences between hobby and professional game design. We've had college level instructors come on and talk about teaching game design as a course at the college level. Sebastian, Rex, Brian, and a couple other folks have come on and joined us there. This is something that we cover quite a bit. This past season, the current season that we're in right now, we had a couple of designers from CNA come in and join us for an hour and a half or so, talking about how their day jobs work in the practitioner space. We're the co-sponsors of Connections Online. Again, some sort of online professional focused conference was something we were interested in all along. And so was Chris. And so it made sense to join forces and bring you Connections Online. We do have some practitioner focused articles and things that focus on the pros, whether it's adapting current commercial games for professional use, or just an analysis of how certain practitioner run events have worked and functioned and operated over the years. And we want to make sure that the professionals get invited to the hobby events. There's a lot of great ideas that come out of the hobby game world. We're actually going to talk about that in the next session here at Connections Online. So we want to make sure that the pros get an opportunity to come see what is happening in the hobby world. There's absolutely no shame in stealing some ideas from us. All right. So we were founded in August of 2018. And I know there's a lot of people saying, well, that wasn't that long ago. And you're right. It wasn't that long ago. But a good chunk of the core of the community had been together for 6 or 7 years before that at another site. And then for a decade or so before that at even another site. This is a community that has migrated in a couple of different places, but has parked themselves permanently at Armchair Dragoons because we have clarity of ownership and clarity of purpose there. And we are in control of everything that we're doing. We're not beholden to some outside actors, the benevolence of the other tyrants to sort of give us space to do what we want to do. And that's what we're doing. And so this was the original founding announcement. So we were founded in August of 2018. Our forums opened a couple of days later in September. Our podcast launched that November, along with our Saturday Night Fight streaming series that we'll talk about here in a minute. Our first origins was in 2019 as the Armchair Dragoons, but we've been running the wargaming program. The people involved have been running the wargaming program at Origins going back to 2014. And even before that, we had a pretty significant hand in helping fill the programming at the Origins War College going all the way back to 2006 or so. Some of those things in conjunction with Merle and his NSDM crew. Our first digital convention was in July of 2020 when the world shut down because of the plague and suddenly nobody could go to real conventions. We decided to take a chance on, hey, what does a digital convention look like for wargame, for wargamers and wargame play? So we tried our first digital convention in July of 2020, and since then we've done 4 others. So this is something, goes back to that whole idea of enabling gameplay. This is something we've done quite a bit. So yes, Tommy, Brant is always right about something, about the differences between games and simulations. All right. So we talked about multiple ways in which you can engage with the Dragoons. We have our forums. There's over 300 members in the forums. This is not one of those, hey, go find everybody we can to come join us in the forums. That's not what we're about. We want the folks that want to be there and want to participate through the forums. But we're not like some sites where if you're not in the forums, you're a nobody. Engage at the level and depth and through the medium with which you are comfortable. We're pretty active on social media, whether it's through Twitter or Facebook in a variety of different places. We've got our own YouTube channel as well as several belonging to our members. And we've got a pretty active Dragoons Discord server as well that is separate from the Connections Online one. I'll post the link to that a little later today. We do a lot of different live events. You're at one right now. But we do a variety of live events throughout the year. We do a bunch of different streaming, whether it's our own Saturday Night Fight series, or in some cases, some of our own talk shows. Quite frequently, we show up on other people's talk shows, whether it's Mo or Gary or any of the other regular hosts out there in the wargaming world. We tend to show up on their shows quite a bit. Our podcast is over 90 episodes so far. We're waiting to hit that magic number of 100 so we can get syndicated through like FX or TNT or somebody. We're working on it. Again, enabling gameplay. We organize a lot of games in our forums. We sponsor and organize live events, whether it's our digital conventions, whether it's Origins, whether it's Buckeye Game Fest. Again, most of these things are hobby focused. That said, we are happy to invite the pros along and help introduce the pros to folks in the hobby world. For the pros that don't have a lot of experience in the hobby world, just the basics of how do you sign up for a game? How do you sign up for a convention? How do I find things to go do? We are happy to help integrate the professionals and practitioners into that hobby world as much as possible. Help finding opponents. Look, we had a couple of folks just sort of send up a flare in our Discord server. Hey, I'm looking for somebody to play this game on Friday afternoon. That game has been running for like 6 straight Fridays at this point, with a couple of folks that just linked up on our Discord server and started a shared game on Vassal. We provide all kinds of advice on different game searches for folks because we've got people that have been in the hobby for 35, 40, 45 years. Sebastian and the folks from GUWS will frequently tag us in queries for, hey, I'm looking for whatever game. And inevitably somebody will find the most obscure, off the wall, hard to find game that we can possibly suggest. And we're not doing it to pick on people. We just have folks that know a lot about all sorts of crazy games. So the kinds of things that we do, these are a couple of the features that we've got regularly through our community. So let's run through a couple of these. Saturday Night Fights was organized by Jim Ozarski. He is known as Cyrano out there in the wargaming world. He was actually awarded the Grognard of the Year title for 2021 by one of the wargaming channels. This thing started pre-pandemic. It was kind of funny because when the pandemic hit and everybody started trying to figure out how to play games online, we just sort of shrugged and said, all right, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing for a year at this point, because we've been doing it for quite a while. Jim's got over 150 episodes on his site, through his YouTube channel so far. We stream every Saturday night. This is a regular crew that gets together, and they're playing everything from minis war games through Commands and Colors, through some Kriegspiels, through all kinds of different stuff. Most Wednesdays, occasional Thursdays, they're also online streaming. So if you just want to see what these games look like when they're being played, get a sense for how the rules work, get a sense for how the flow of action is, pop in and watch one of them live or watch one of the recordings, and it'll give you a sense. This is not edited at all. They pop open Tabletop Simulator, they turn on the stream, and they play a game while they're all sitting there chatting with each other, and in some cases interacting with the people in the YouTube chat. We organize these things in our forum, so if you're interested in joining these games, that's where you pop in and find them. And so this is the Game with the Dragoons area of our forums. You can see we've got areas for Saturday Night Fights, for people looking for online games. We run a couple of different online Kriegspiels. These are double-blind games that are primarily played through email. Some of these things will take 2.5, 3 years to fully play, with, one turn per week, kind of going in and out with folks. This is an area where you can engage with those games and come find us and come jump in. Tuesday. So this ends up being one of our more popular features, actually. I'm the primary guy compiling these things. I'm not the guy writing it all, but I'm the guy compiling most of it. We started back in April of 2020, and it's been a continuous evolution ever since then. But this is the headlines from the wargaming world each week, whether it's new releases or new pre-orders that you can find, or links to other people doing some pretty cool content, or some headlines in terms of actual news out there in the wargaming world, a recap of what happened with the Dragoons over the past week. We do include a section focused on the professional and practitioner world, and I'll show you that here in just a second. We're very focused on what can I do. Somebody says, hey, we're announcing this new product will be available in 2025. Like, I don't care about that. That's not the kind of stuff we're trying to share. We want to focus on, hey, this pre-order is now available. Go pledge your money to help get this pre-order done, whatever it might be. And there are multiple contributors to this. I've got folks that send me stuff all the time for inclusion in Tuesday Newsday. A couple of them are actually here attending the conference. So the practitioner and pro piece down there at the end, you can sort of see. This is from, 2-3 weeks ago, that there was different news that we put out that's relevant to the practitioner and professional area. This is toward the bottom of each week's Tuesday Newsday, so it's a little easier to find. Scroll to the bottom, there's the practitioner area. What are some headlines? Again, primarily wargame focused, occasionally job related. If there are war game agencies hiring, we've got a couple of those hiring notices in this week's that'll be dropping in, I don't know, an hour or so. So that's the practitioner and professional area of our Tuesday News Day. Our podcast is known as Mentioned in Dispatches. There's actually another Mentioned in Dispatches podcast out there that's like World War I history, but it's not us. If you look for Mentioned in Dispatches and Armchair Dragoons, you'll find us. We started recording this thing within a couple of weeks of setting up the community because we'd had 5 years of podcasting experience somewhere else doing that production for ourselves. We are intentionally loose with the structure on this thing. The idea was put a couple of wargamers in a bar, having a conversation, and just hit record. And that's kind of how our podcast comes out. That's by design. We are not overly formal and not overly structured. That said, the professional and practitioner focused episodes of the show tend to be a little more structured and focused than many of the others. We're going to cover a wide variety. Look, we spent an hour and a half talking about dice one time, and it was a riot. It was a lot of fun talking about it. But yeah, we spent an hour and a half talking about dice. We do roughly 2 seasons a year, one before basically spring and fall is what we're looking at. We take a break over the summer because everybody's traveling. We're dealing with conventions, as other things going on anyway. So that's where we are. And that's where you're going to find us. The 2 seasons of the year, like I said, roughly 10 to 12 episodes. I think we had one go 8, we had one go 14. So that's where we're looking. And so here's an example of what the page looks like. This is just a couple of weeks ago. We had an episode where we brought in Brian Train, who's done some game design on the conflict in Ukraine from 6-7 years ago. And he and I both took a look back at some of the designs we had done on the Ukraine, on a potential what was then a potential conflict in Ukraine. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we screw up? What did we what did we do correct? How did we figure these things out? Those are just some of the things that we kind of covered in the podcasting space. So what else we got here? The event calendar. So this was one of the first pages that we had set up on our site, where we had a consolidated calendar with literally every convention that we could find that would be of interest to wargamers, every club meeting we could find that would be of interest to wargamers, every regular sort of happening online that we could find that would be of interest to wargamers, and nobody used it, which was a little frustrating because it's been a ton of time setting this thing up. And then the pandemic hit, and it didn't matter because nobody could get together for conventions anyway. But after the pandemic, it became clear that there was some interest in this event calendar being sort of revived. Somebody referred to it as the Wargaming Sync Matrix, which was totally fine. So that's what we brought together. And so now we brought it back as a unified convention calendar. And look, it's a Google Calendar. You can go subscribe to this thing if you want. This is looking back at this past February. You can see there were a ton of events this past February that all happened on a regular basis. Again, go hit armchairdragoons.com, and right across the top, there's the calendar link in the menu bar. That's what you're looking at for the Armchair Dragoons. We do a bunch of live events. Again, you're at one right now. We have our ACDC, the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. I think that might actually be Tommy's fault. I don't remember exactly who it was that suggested we abbreviate it that way, but that's sort of how it came out. Because it rolls off the tongue a little better than any of the other variety of acronym we could come together. We're using MLK weekend each weekend as the time in which we run that convention. It gives us an extra day or so for those live events. That's a gameplay focused convention. There's lots of games. We have designers come in and actually teach their games through online play. We'll have a bunch of different talk shows where we'll bring in some guests to do some things. We have some student presentations. So it's as close as we can get to an in-person convention while everybody's at home in their pajamas. We do Connections Online in mid-April. We do the wargaming program at Origins in mid-June. For those of you that don't know what Origins is, it's one of the 2 or 3 largest tabletop-focused gaming conventions in the U.S. Happens in Columbus, Ohio in mid-June every year. This year it's actually a little early. And it started off as a war game heavy convention, and over the years has slowly morphed to where war games are almost an accidental inclusion at this point, much to our frustration. But the Armchair Dragoons are focused on operating the wargaming area. We run the wargaming program at Origins every year and have a variety of events that folks come back to every year to come be a part of. We do some command post exercises that are for those of you that spent time in the military, it's very similar to a Janus exercise, only we teach folks how an actual military staff plans and operates a mission. We give them the mission briefing, let them put their plan together, and our guys play the OP4. And so after about turn 2, when their plan completely falls apart, our coaches will look at the commander and go, all right, now what do you want to do? And they have to actually execute the plan and adjust to it as the battle unfolds over that 4-hour period that they're playing the game. Buckeye Game Fest is a relatively recent addition to our event calendar. Buckeye Game Fest has been going on for 25 years, but we have now made a commitment to being regular attendees for that. That one also happens in the spring, usually around the same time as Connections Online. But that one's in person. That one's also in Columbus, Ohio. But again, we have a pre-existing relationship with some of the folks that help run BGF, and that's why we're there quite frequently. All righty. Unboxing Day. This is just a chance for folks to take a look at some of the new games out on the commercial market. These are not full reviews. This is just us showing off the things we got recently. A lot of folks in the hobby space like the unboxing or first look videos and photo galleries just to take a look at what's inside all of those different boxes you see up on the shelf. And so this is a chance to sort of show those things off. We have a bunch of references on our site. So folks that are relatively new to the wargaming space, we have a wargaming glossary and terms area on our site. We've got a wargaming bibliography that is primarily academic research focused. Some of it's a little out of date, but it will take all sorts of suggestions and recommendations that we are happy to paste into that bibliography. Our digital convention archives are on there. So if you want to watch all the streams from last year's Connections Online, that's a place you can go to find them. And then we host some different research papers, and we'll talk about that here coming up in a few minutes. But it's an opportunity for folks that have done academic focused research that was never intended for conference presentation or journal publication to still share their research and go ahead and show off a little bit of the hard work that they've done. So what's next for the Dragoons? Some upcoming events. We'll talk about the research papers and then some of our community engagement. So these are the events that we have on the calendar that we are planning to be a part of over the next few years, out through next summer. Connections Online, you're at right now. We've got Origins coming up in a few weeks this summer. MACE is a North Carolina-based convention, usually in Charlotte, that the last one actually is going to be this coming November. The owner who had been running that convention for 25 years just recently passed away. And they're going to do one more convention kind of in his honor, but also donating all the proceeds to his family. And we're going to go be a part of that in Charlotte this coming November. Our next and our next Connections Online, as Chris noted, next April around this time. And they've already announced the dates for Origins in 2023. So those of you that want to plan way far ahead have the opportunity to do so. All right. Where are we going? For research papers, this is something that we've tried, this initiative we tried to kick off a couple of different times. And I'm hoping that between the folks watching who want to spread the word, as well as folks that view this after the fact and want to go ahead and get the word out, we're looking for research papers from college students, for folks that did different kinds of game-focused research, whether you're in a sociology department or an international relations department or in the math department, like it doesn't matter. A lot of folks use hobby gaming as an area of interest that they look into for their research papers, whether it's examining market volatility in the hobby games world, or whether it's researching motivation for game players, whatever it might be. There are a lot of folks that use hobby gaming as a subject in their research papers, but there's no sort of hobby gaming school or professional gaming school out there where all of those research papers kind of end up residing. And so we want to kind of be a bit of a clearinghouse for those folks, if at all possible. So we're looking for student papers like the senior thesis on, computational analytics of the Next War series by GMT, whatever it might be. Ones that were never intended to go off to conferences or to journals. We're not trying to create some sort of shadow journal at all. We just want to give students an opportunity to share the work that they've done because it's good work. We're also looking for any AARs of formal events. So if you did some sort of formal training event through your school or through some sort of professional organization, whether it's DoD is a little more problematic because of clearance issues and such. But if you're doing training for emergency preparedness in a 5-county area of the Appalachian Mountains, fine, right? If you've got a formal AAR and you want to share those lessons for other people to access them, we're happy to help host that. We're also looking to develop some internally generated research. I'd done a bunch of stuff back when I was in grad school in partnership with the Game Manufacturers Association. And there's some of that research that we're looking to revive and revisit 15 years later and see how that research shakes out today. All right, community engagement. We've got some local game store support we're going to be kicking off soon. We've been saying this for a little while, but we've actually got enough of a backlog of content built up now that we're going to start sharing information about local game stores to allow, again, enabling gameplay, places where you can go find some games to play, find some folks to play with. Perhaps they host regular events that give you an opportunity to meet up at a certain location and be able to play. Those are the kinds of things we want to help enable. And so we're going to start highlighting some local game stores that are wargame friendly for that purpose. We've got a variety of joint appearances in wargaming media, again, through all sorts of other people's online shows and their regular live streams, as well as some of our own. We've provided some support to wargaming organizations such as the Georgetown University Wargaming Society over the years. UW-Stout, we've had some guest speakers show up in some of their game design classes there, as well as lending some expertise behind the scenes to some other college wargaming organizations just to help them find resources or get some things started. And then that event calendar coordination, trying to coordinate with other organizations. If you've got some local gaming club that has a shareable Google event calendar, let us know so we can add it to that master sync matrix that we showed you a few minutes ago. If you've got a local gaming organization or gaming club that doesn't yet have a Google event calendar, go make one so you can share it with us and we can put it on the big calendar. All right, that's it for the infomercial. I know I was moving a little quick. We've only got an hour to fit in here, but I also wanted to leave some space for questions, whether it's about the Dragoons in particular or about us as a whole. And just along the lines of connections online, I do want to grab one thing here real quick and share something off of a screen. So let's see if this is going to work correctly. And it is not. All right, never mind. I was going to share the event, the overall event grid for Connections Online. Instead, I'm just going to post the link in the chat for folks to go check out. If you go hit that page, that is the Connections Online page from our website, from the Armchair Dragoons website. There's also an event grid on there. That's the master event grid for everything happening here at Connections Online. It's sortable by date. It's sortable by type of event. It's sortable by duration. So you can go find different kinds of the different activities. You can sort of zoom in on what you might be interested in here at Connections Online. So I've talked a lot. I'm going to take a swig of my drink while questions start to stack up in the chat, and don't everybody ask them all at once. Apparently, I did an excellent job of explaining everything because nobody's asking questions. I love it. No more questions. I'm heartbroken. All right. Chris, you're muted.
Yeah. All right. Let's try that again. So that was the equivalent, by the way, for all the panelists and moderators out there, that was the equivalent of the hostess always making sure that you spill something on the buffet so that other people don't feel bad about spilling something on the buffet. I totally did that on purpose. So, Brant, there was a couple of references to it, so I'm definitely curious. What exactly is it that you and James Sterrett disagree about?
About whether or not he's correct, actually. So there is a longer presentation. This has been a running discussion for me and for James for almost 15 years at this point, because we used to co-host a seminar at the Origins War College on games and sims for military training and learning. And part of my academic background, when I was working on a PhD in communication, part of what I had developed was sort of some typologies of interaction for learning and for educational uptake. And the idea that games and simulations are not necessarily the same thing. You can have games that are not simulations and simulations that are not games. And so when people start talking about war games, well, that's more of a game than a simulation. Well, that might be, but you can be a simulation without being a game, and vice versa. And so there are times where they do, in fact, overlap. James takes a slightly different approach, and I don't want to speak for him. I'll let him defend himself or attempt to in another venue. But while I have the podium, dang it, I am always right. I will link a video in the chat that sort of lays out some of that game and simulation argument that I have, and folks can go take a chance at watching it when they get an opportunity. So
I should say that James Sterrett was actually invited to come to Connections Online and be a participant, as was his partner in crime there at Command and General Staff College, Mike Dunn. But as James said, he said that we managed to pick the worst possible week of the year to schedule.
Yeah, they've got a major exercise going on that it's all hands on deck for them.
It's all hands on deck, 12-hour days sorts of things already. So we're not really expecting to see them at all. But James is a very learned guy. And I think this goes back to something that's a sort of a recurring theme in the war game community, is every professional war gamer, every war game practitioner has their own variation of the definition of what a war game is. Some people have more than one. And by that, I'm explicitly referencing Peter Perla, who had the definition that he came out with in his 1990 book, The Art of Wargaming, which is sort of the Bible of this sort of thing. Or it's a little long in the tooth, but it's still, so it went from being like absolutely, totally, and completely critical, the book, to just a really, really, really good book, because it's a little long in the tooth. But his definition of wargaming has changed over time. So he used to explicitly say can't involve the actual military forces, and he sort of backed off on that. I'm sort of famous amongst my colleagues for having a very liberal definition of what wargaming is, because I have a tendency to sort of look at it mostly along the lines of what are you trying to get as an output of it, and so other activities that are close that get the same sorts of outputs, I'm willing to just sort of paint with a broad brush. It's okay if the definition is a little blurry around the edges. So
and we covered that quite a bit yesterday in sort of the intro to professional wargaming video that we did yesterday, where we talked about a couple of different definitions and the idea that the center mass of the target is pretty well defined. And the further you get from center mass, the fuzzier things get. Those edge cases sometimes are war games and sometimes might not be, and it's not always a universal answer. And that's okay. There's some room for fuzziness in the career field as a whole. There are times when precision is needed, and that's fine. Be precise when it's needed. But otherwise, you're just trying to create an argument. And there's times where those arguments, like when you need to fill a 90-minute podcast, those arguments are great because that's how you get 90 minutes worth of content. Outside of a 90-minute podcast, it can sometimes be a little silly.
I'd go one step further and say that in most cases, what you need to do is you need to be analyzing your objectives and figure out what you're trying to accomplish, and then sort of figure out what you need to do to accomplish those objectives, either from a training standpoint or an analytical standpoint, and then design the activity that meets those objectives. And it's really more about understanding what the components, the various ideas about how to game something, what those get you. And then you build the activity that you need to do to reach your objective. And, sometimes that activity is something that everybody on planet Earth will agree is a game. And sometimes it ends up being an edge case that people argue about. But the more important thing is that you had a problem that you needed to deal with. You defined some objectives about how to approach that problem. Even if the problem is, I want to have fun on Saturday night, right? You need to figure out what the objective is to do that, and then come up with something that meets that objective or those objectives, right? It's usually plural. Yeah. So spending a whole lot of time having arguments about how many wargaming angels can dance on the head of a simulation pin strikes me as being sort of, it's useful as long as education is taking point, but usually it goes way beyond that. We do have a question.
Self-licking ice cream cone. So here's the thing. We can throw some answers at Rob. Here's what I will tell you, Rob. If you have the opportunity to to attend the panel on hiring new wargamers, that is the exact kind of question that folks like Ed are going to want to help answer in that panel. Chris and I can throw some answers at you, but I think that's the perfect panel where that question is absolutely relevant. With that said, Chris will answer it anyway here.
Yeah, I'd offer the following observation, and that is, if you're dealing with something that isn't sort of like straight stick down the middle of somebody's academic academic study, then you probably want to have a variety of people involved, right? If you're building a bridge, having a bunch of people that studied building bridges is probably the right answer. But this isn't building a bridge, right? This is something that's more nebulous than that, right? And so you need to have people that can figure out what the objectives are and help you define the objectives. And you need to have people that can understand how the player psychology works and all that other stuff. So when push comes to shove, it's good to have people that have a variety of stuff, a variety of backgrounds. Now, I spent a bunch of time in the intelligence community, and before that, I spent a bunch of time doing technical support. And one of the things that I learned there, especially in the tech support job, when I was hiring people, I didn't look for people that knew our software. I can teach them my software, right? I've got an entire building full of people that understand the software. I mean, the teaching the software is the easy part. I'm hiring for the skill sets that I can't teach myself. And CIA very much approaches the problem that way. It's like, I can turn you, and this is a real example from a friend of mine. She just retired from CIA. She was working on her master's degree in English literature, and they turned her into a China expert. Because you know what? They hired somebody who knew how to write. And then they taught her about the subject matter that she was going to write about. And because they've got world-class instruction, they could do that. And they were willing to pay the money to send her to all the schools that she needed to do to become a China expert. And so I don't know about all the game design classes, the game design majors out there, but I guess the thing that my gut instinct says, don't major in game design, minor in it. Find something else, or at least have an interesting minor that goes along with it.
That's a very similar approach that the journalism world would be well informed to do. And I'm saying this as a guy with a master's in journalism who's worked in media off and on over the years. You've got to have knowledge of a field other than the production of the actual item in which you're doing. In terms of what Chris is talking about, you've got to have knowledge of a field beyond how to create a war game. You've got to have some domain knowledge that the war games are about. Similarly to journalism, you can't just know how to write an article. You've got to know the subject that you're writing the articles about. And so I think those are very similar there.
I'd add, take a modeling class. And I don't mean like, a hardcore computer science class. What I mean by take a modeling class is take a class where you have to think about how you collect the data, how you put the model together, et cetera, et cetera. I had a class when I was an undergrad called Modeling International Behavior. And it's a class, I've been stunned over the years about how often I would find myself going like, okay, I remember back in this class, how would I have approached it in this class? Do that all the time. And the other thing is, people come to me all the time and say, how do you get hired to be a war game designer? And I said, I'll be damned if I know. Because when push comes to shove, I sort of backed into it, right? The people that I know who do war game design, most of them are hardcore war gamers, right? The people who sort of stumbled into it like me. there's some people that end up in a job and they're told you're going to be a war game guy, right? And then they turn themselves into a war game guy. But there's other people like me who sort of like saw, the brass ring was somebody offered it to me and I grabbed it. But the reason why I got to the point where somebody handed it to me was that I had done a bunch of I played a lot of games, and I went to graduate school to get a degree in defense policy studies, national security studies. And I spent a lot of time studying about, how Rand approached stuff in the 1960s and things like that. So when I was able to get to that point, I was able to say, here's the things in my background that just happened to fit into that. And then I could go into an interview and have a discussion and say, WEWs. That's the WEWs problem from Rand back in the 1960s. And here's why WEWs don't work and blah, 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 blah. And, I could at least convince them to give me a shot. And the person I was convincing to give me a shot was Peter Perla. So apparently it worked. So Sean Barnett suggests that operations research is the correct answer. I will note Sean doesn't have a degree in operations research, and he is a wargamer at Rand. But yeah,
Chris, we've got an interesting question here that I don't want to cut you off, but a bunch of what we're talking about right now is actually stuff that probably belongs in the hiring new wargamers panel a little later. And I want to make sure we can address those in the right place so people watching this after the fact can still catch up to it. We're going to answer this question and we're going to call it here only because we're going to hit the top of the hour and we don't want to steal time from Mo's group. Growing organic interest in wargaming in such an environment, I think this is probably a multifaceted answer. And this is a great opportunity to tell folks, hey, we've got some text channels for each of these panels in our Discord that we are happy to continue the dialogue beyond the broadcast over in Discord, where folks may have a variety of suggestions for you to help answer this question. And that's going to be a great place to continue what might turn into a longer discussion. I think at a certain point, there's got to be some sort of built-in reward process for getting confrontational. I think ultimately people are going to behave the way in which they are rewarded for behaving. And within the context of wargaming, you've got to force them out of their comfort zone by sort of rewarding that kind of behavior. Beyond that, I think we're going to have a much more robust discussion probably in the Discord to help answer this question. So I'm going to paste it over there for folks to continue that conversation.
Yeah, let me offer my 20 seconds worth. There are plenty of games out there, even in some war games, where they're cooperative games where you're basically fighting the system, right? And if the system is designed well enough, I think it still counts as a war game, because if the opponent system, even if it's part of the core of the game itself, it's sort of a paper AI fighting back at you. In that case, that's still that still meets the definition of a war game, and it can really be more about cooperation. And if you think about it, like if you're a military unit, right, if you're planning the invasion of I'll say Borneo, just because Borneo was the classic example used at the Naval War College. So I've invaded Borneo in a war game. If you're invading Borneo, and the way we did it is we were all fighting the system, right? So we played this game, and I was the J4, and you had the J2, and you had you had all that stuff, and you're fighting the system. So you're being cooperative with your own side, and the system is your opponent. And so that can sort of that can work along those lines. And if you've got a problem beyond that, presumably if you're doing military stuff, you can at least get to the point where you can fight the bad guys, right? And so from that standpoint, I think that's probably the place where I would start. And with that in mind, I think we really should call it so we can go over to Mo.
Yeah. So the next panel, as a part of Connections Online, we've got Mo Fitzgerald, who runs the excellent hobby-focused wargaming YouTube channel, Mo's Game Table, who is bringing in a bunch of current wargame designers from the hobby space to talk about current innovations and kind of the state of the art of hobby wargame design. And so that's going to be coming up next. Mo's going to take the show from there. It's going to be about a 2-hour panel, so you'll have an opportunity for some discussion, but there's some great designers in there who are fabulous speakers and very passionate about their content. So take a look at that one coming up next. And then if you're wanting to see what else is coming, go take a look at the schedule. Last plug I do want to make, the social happy hour this evening. very unstructured. Hop in the voice channels in Discord and just get to meet your fellow conference attendees. It's an opportunity for purely social interaction, but definitely come join us for that this evening in the Discord server. With that, I think we're done for the welcome. Want to say thanks to everybody for being here at Connections Online. Refresh your drinks, settle in for what should be a great couple of days of some core event programming, and whatever we've got in the after hours extended program that tickles your fancy, please jump in and join. So thank you very much on behalf of the organizing committee. We'll look forward to a great week of conference here.